how can you justify relaxing when you're under a lot of stress and there are real challenges? So, relaxation in many ways, I think, gets misunderstood, or maybe overly simplified might be another way of saying it. Because there is an association sometimes with relaxation of essentially disengaging. And of course, to some extent, there is a kind of a disengagement that happens. But that doesn't mean that it involves just kind of turning your back on something that's going on in front of you. And quite the opposite can be the case, because sometimes when we're caught up in a stress mode, there's a sort of a form of distraction, almost a self-hypnosis that happens in that stress, that we get caught up in a kind of a spiral of that way of thinking, which can sometimes cloud our perception of what's in front of us and lead to us overreacting or reacting to stimuli or triggers that maybe aren't the most important ones in that moment. So that isn't really so useful. When there's stress, when there's a moment of stress and being triggered by it, what our mind is doing is it's getting us into that response mode. Fight, flight, freezing. Some form of response is going to be needed in that moment if you are in danger. Adrenaline, cortisol, various hormones are being released in your body, and your mind is being brought into that kind of hyper-alert state where you tend to not just ignore challenges, because of course that wouldn't be a good idea, but you tend to maybe zoom in and focus on what the challenges are in that moment as best you perceive them. But that's the issue. You mightn't be quite correct in that, even though you're probably well-intentioned in it. And it's easy to get caught up in a bit of a feedback loop of thinking about those challenges, and it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy then. So relaxing is not just a reward. Sometimes that's how we think of it. It's a reward when you get all the serious stuff done, any of the problems you might have in the world, conquer them, then you can relax. Like at the end of a lot of those 80s movies, you know, where they deal with whatever the problem is, or they carry out the job, or do whatever they need to do, and they're there then on the beach with a cocktail with a little umbrella in it, and the sun is shining, and the relaxing music comes in, and the credits roll. That's not the only role for relaxation. Great, that's fine too. But, you know, let's be brutally honest for just a moment. When are we going to reach that point where everything's done and it's all sorted and we can just sit there, you know? And a further point is, even if we did reach that point, human nature being what it is, what we would probably do is probably go find something else to figure out. You know, you want evidence of that? What do people do in their time? They play sports, which is challenge and competition. They create things, they knit and they sew, they get involved in art projects, they try and improve things. When software works well, still it's improved and modules and features are added. It's not in our nature as human beings to just sit there. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean we shouldn't sit there some of the time. It's a very useful thing to do. And also, don't get me wrong, that there are certain basic challenges that can be addressed and can put you in a better place. So hopefully some of the things you're doing then are more creative rather than kind of firefighting exercises. So by all means, that can be the case. But the main point is not to just think of relaxation as this end goal, but more as something we can bring forward and use as part of our day-to-day process when it comes to achieving things and actually making them happen in the first place. Anyway, so ease and action are not incompatible with each other. That little bit of space can be very, very helpful. Because when in a challenge you give yourself a bit of space, the first thing you realize is, as I mentioned, ease and action aren't incompatible, because a bit of ease can actually give you clarity as to what the best action to take is anyway. Now, even if ease and action were incompatible, sometimes action isn't a good idea. Sometimes through momentum, we're about to do something which is actually a poor idea to do. So by bringing in a little bit of ease, I'm not talking about sitting around for weeks when we, are in an apparently urgent situation, but I mean just taking the moment to stop and to step back, figuratively and literally, and to say, what is actually going on here? And how can I respond to what's happening in a way I'm going to be happy with now, but also tomorrow when I look back on today, and 1 month from now when I look back on today, and 1 year from now when I look back on today. just to see what that is. And sometimes action, in terms of, engaging or doing something, could be a very poor choice in that moment. So having that space can be really, really useful. However, action may well be a good idea. And of course, in a sense, we're always going to take action because even doing nothing is sort of something. But the point is you're being intentional in that moment. And hopefully what you're seeing more clearly are an array of options as to what action you may choose to take. And that gives you room then not to just have something defaulted upon you. It's like, oh, well, here's what you have to do by default. No, you get to actually look at the options and choose what's right for you. And even in situations where what you're instinctively going to do does still seem to be the right option when you breathe and look at all the options, even if you end up doing what you would have done anyway, it still changes when you bring in that kind of breathing space and that comfort in that room. That's really, really helpful. You'll often do it better as a result of the consent that you're bringing in and making better decisions. So that can only really come from something like relaxation, something like ease. And again, this is not to be confused with just taking the situation you're in as being trivial, just being kind of disengaged, being lethargic, being overly distanced and removed to the degree that you're not actually conscious and cognizant of what's happening in front of you. That's not what this is. This is about ease, actually making you more effective at being engaged in the moment, about seeing what you value, and then about engaging effectively on the basis of that. So that sort of relaxation and that kind of ease is very, very welcome. And I think the main point is just to recognize that and to leave room for it. Because it's sometimes the case, it's not so much that we can't even relax, it's that we don't give ourselves permission to. We think, no, there are too many problems. How can I afford to? Or it's not appropriate to. When in fact, that might be when it's needed the most. That ease, that space, that room that you give yourself to say, well, what is actually happening? Let me gain a little bit of clarity. Let me breathe and loosen my shoulders. Now let me see the options and let me take the most effective one. And that might be quite quick. That process doesn't need to take long if there is something important happening. But it's a very important process because arguably the higher the stakes are in that moment, the more it is something genuinely challenging, the more important it is to actually make a good decision and to move forward using all of your capacities rather than just reacting and using reflex. So what's your experience? Have you found ways yourself to kind of integrate relaxation but still being suitably proactive as well when needed? There's degrees to this, isn't there? There's, maybe people to a fault are just sort of disengaged and nothing seems to bother them, but maybe too far that way. And other people are just all action, but maybe they're not giving themselves room to breathe. Have you experiences in your life where you've kind of hit it in the middle and you kind of have given yourself space, but you've still been kind of decisive and engaged as much as need be? Do share it in the comments if so. If you found this valuable, do like, subscribe, and share. And what's your experience? Do you have any questions or topic suggestions? You can contribute in the comments, on social media using #bodymindself, or on jfl.com.